Sure. So thank you, Chastity. I am Bria Douglas. I am the Director of Human Resources Consulting at Ian and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital, Chicago. I have worked there for about close to 16 years. Most of my professional experience has been in not-for-profits. I started off at the American Dental Association in HR, worked what was formerly known as Children's Memorial Hospital. I left there for about 2 years, went to work at Advocate Christ Medical Center, and then went back to Children's Memorial, which is now known as Lurie Children. So all of my professional experience has been in the not-for-profit industry, originally starting off as a human resources recruiter, being promoted to a manager, and now director. My primary focus in my role is really the HR business partner piece, so dealing a lot with employee engagement, employee relations, performance management, coaching of both leaders as well as staff. And so that's a little bit about my journey. I do value being at an organization for a long amount of time. You don't see that a lot. So I do have a lot of history with the organization, but I always am welcome to hear from other people who are very intrigued by colleagues who work at other industries, in other worlds, for-profit worlds especially. In terms of right now dealing with the COVID-19 situation, fortunately, COVID-19 has not had the same effects on pediatric patients as it has on the adult population. So we are not experiencing a lot of what you see on the news with some other organizations, like University of Chicago or Northwestern. We have had very few cases at our hospital. One of the things that, is always top of mind is the safety of our employees, with people traveling to work and potentially getting the virus from their coworkers. So we put some steps into play, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but just kind of giving you a little bit about my background and my industry right now in pediatrics dealing with COVID-19.
So thank you for that, Bria. I also appreciate, right, the various roles that you've held in HR in your organization. So it's going to bring a lot of perspective as folks are thinking about how they can navigate in their current positions. So next, I'm going to kick it to Jasmine Guy, who's had a brief introduction as Roderick was going through and talking about the organization. But Jasmine, why don't you tell us a little bit about the path to your current position at Major Lindsey in Africa, and then, how are you doing? How are you faring in the midst of COVID-19?
Thank you, Chastity. Unlike most leaders in HR, I did not take a traditional path, and a lot of it has to do with when I entered the job market. We're about to go into an economic downturn. So I actually started out in communications for the Illinois State Senate, which really allowed me to learn a little bit more about the political landscape, but also really learning about how to be an effective communicator. And I will say that in the midst of everything that's going on right now, I'm really able to really tap into those communication skills, both orally as well as written, has been very helpful during this time. After I left the Illinois State Senate and I was there for a year, I came back to Chicago. And then that is when I went into a traditional HR role, and I was a special assistant to the Associate Vice President of Human Resources. So in that capacity, it was a very unique time because this was like her last job before retirement. And so she was really tasked with revamping the HR function. And so really trying to get us out of silos and really being seen as business partners. So it really allowed me to really help and step in and help with crisis management plans, looking at our emergency plans, being both on the university side as well as the hospital side, and being able to respond, when the nurses are going to go on strike and different individuals like that. And that was for the first time that I learned that I was considered an essential employee and almost like a first responder. So that when we did have a crisis when the nurses went on strike, It was just more of a, it's going to be all hands on deck. So you might have to pass out X, Y, and Z. You might have to actually work with patients. And so being in those strategy meetings, I will say, really has helped me for right now and being able to support the leaders in my organization. From there, I went to a training and development position, but in fundraising, so using my nonprofit skills, and then just kind of realized that it's not anything I wanted to do. And so therefore, I kind of came over to the diversity and inclusion side. And I will say that in the midst of everything that's going on with COVID-19, a lot of times when people are in crisis, they forget about the importance of being inclusive, and they forget about individuals who do not look like them and do not have the same resources like them. So as a diversity and inclusion professional, it's my duty to remind our leaders on how they need to be a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more mindful in their communication and the support that they're giving staff at this time, because we all are we're a global organization. A lot of what we do is relationship building. So it is like face to face. So helping people to now understand and adapt to how we can still do business, but doing it still virtually, but in a way we're still able to make those connections. And then understanding that we have people on different economic levels. And so therefore home looks different for them. And so even though we're working at home, some people, forget about their level of privilege. And while they have, all of the electronic equipment that they need, or they might have the bandwidth for their internet and things of that nature, we have to also then be a little bit more mindful that some of our administrative staff may not have those things. And so instead of us waiting for them to tell us what they need and in what they require for their jobs, is we need to be more mindful and inclusive and actually ask them, is there anything that we can do for them? So I look forward to today's conversation and being able to just provide a lot of perspective on how to be a little bit more inclusive in our thinking and in our practices as we're navigating COVID-19. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. Yeah, I think you're going to bring a lot of perspective in how D&I professionals really partner with folks who are in the traditional HR roles to make sure that what we're rolling out for our organizations is supportive, is inclusive, is thinking about kind of some of those issues that you have the ability to do when you solely focus on D&I in a way that you don't when you have all of the various considerations you have a traditional HR role. So thank you so much for joining us. And last but certainly not least, Raymond, would love for you to take an opportunity to tell us a little bit about how you came to lead HR for JLL. And of course, like everyone else, tell us how you're faring in the midst of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you have about an hour. That's about how long it'll take me to get through my background. No, seriously, I'll try to keep it brief. My story is what I would consider a non-traditional path. So in my current role, I'm the head of human resources for all of the Americas, roughly about 35,000 of the 93,000 employees we have globally. I partner closely with the CEO and the region CEO, as well as our operating CEOs, developing their talent strategy and also business strategies. Now, how I got here, and I'm new to Chicago, but how I got here is a bit of a journey. I never intended or thought I'd be working in HR. Coming out of high school, I accepted a football scholarship at the University of Georgia. And so, like every kid, my dream was to play in the NFL, and then you get to the school and you understand you're probably not as good as you thought you were, so you probably need to focus on academics, right? Well, my time at Georgia coincided, if you remember, the first Gulf War. This was around 1989, so I guess you know about how old I might be. But coming from a family with a long military service tradition, it was one of those moments of truth, and I've had a lot of them throughout my career. But what was important to me was serving others. That's something that was instilled in me as a young boy, growing up in North Carolina. And there was a bit of bragging rights too, because my cousins, my brothers, they all served, but they never had an opportunity to participate in wartime. And so this was my time. And so I elected to leave school. I joined the military, and 11 years later, I think was one of the best decisions that I had ever made. I started my journey in the corporate sector at PricewaterhouseCoopers, working in compensation and benefits. And then over the next several years, it was just increasing roles of responsibility, diversity and inclusion, labor experience, non-union experience, had an opportunity to work abroad in Southeast Asia, in Italy, in Geneva, Switzerland, working among global teams, really experiencing different cultures, how they think about things and how they get business done. Prior to coming to Chicago, I was actually in Salt Lake City, if you can believe it. The company I worked for, they owned about 80 different companies, including professional sports. You may know the Utah Jazz, that was one of the companies that we owned, as well as automotive, insurance, real estate, healthcare, you name it, we were in it. In terms of COVID-19, I wouldn't say we're in the middle of it, but that really consumes our day, most of our days. That's the topic of discussion. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that we're able to provide our employees with optimism, and because we will come out of it, but the new normal will look very differently than the way they've worked in the past. Our workspaces may look different. And so we're just trying to make sure that we're being as direct and transparent in terms of how we communicate with them to help prepare them for what's next and engage them where we can. So like many of you, I mean, that's probably most of your day are spent on calls or in meetings addressing client issues, employee issues, and everything in between.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I hate that I've neglected to mention up until now that I'm also from North Carolina, so we'll have to connect about that after the panel. So let's jump in. We took a little time with the introductions, but I thought it was important because you guys need to know that you have a panel of folks who really are well equipped to help guide you through this. So we want to know a little bit more about you guys as we start to shape the conversation so that we can make sure that we're talking about things that are going to be relevant to you and able to use. So you should see a poll that's just popped up on your screen. So what's your level of professional experience? Are you an HR beginner, right? And we've clarified for you how the organization is thinking about that, an emerging leader or a senior leader within your organization. And we're tag teaming control here. So Jasmine, are you able to see results? Perfect, thank you so much. Okay, so it looks like about over half of the folks on the call are emerging leaders. So kind of in that mid-level position, which is good for us to know. There's a good amount of you guys, a little over 30% who are senior leaders. And those of you who are probably way ahead of where some of us were in when we were in your position, right? Because you're already attending stuff like this and thinking about how you can best help your organization at this time. Thank you for that. Next question. Have you been asked to provide any guidance to your organization in the face of COVID-19? Perfect, and that poll should have popped up for you guys. Okay, so about 78% of you, which I think is what we expected before we got on this call, was that the majority of folks here were going to be really in the throes of kind of helping to usher your organizations through what's happening. So we'll talk specifically about COVID-19, but we'll also keep in mind the general idea of crises in your organization so that we're making sure the conversation is relevant to everyone involved. So last one, what communication tools has your organization used during COVID-19 to help support your employees? So you have a wealth of things to kind of pick from here. We'll give folks about 10 more seconds to complete that one. Okay, can we see the results? So email is a strong tool that folks are using, video conferencing, an intranet page. Okay, a little less than half of us are using intranet pages in our organization. And then not as much, right? Maybe about a fourth for employee resource group, town halls, newsletters. So we'll get into some conversation around that. Awesome. So we came together as panelists to really try to think about how do we narrow this conversation so that it makes sense. So the first tool that we really came around is that you've got to figure out how you can nail the basics of the critical work of the organization, right? You've got to make sure that you guys can still operate business as usual in the sense of serving clients or meeting what your business goals are in the face of COVID-19 and crises. So Bria, let's start with you, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys get a better picture of the panelists and as they're talking. But Bria, let's start with you. How do we continue to do the basic functions, right, in our line of work when you're trying to navigate your organization through a crisis?
Right. So, this caught us a little off guard in terms of, planning. So figuring out what's critical, what we can continue to do as an organization, and thinking about what we may have to stop doing as an organization. And for all of us, that including employees physically coming into work. So taking a look at, your workforce. And as Jasmine mentioned earlier, it's easy to say, oh yeah, everybody can just work from home, but no, everybody can't just work from home. Some people do not have the equipment to work from home. They don't have a safe space to work. So we're dealing with people with different backgrounds and different experiences. So taking that into consideration. Once leaders develop their plan on what work will look like for the next couple of weeks or next couple of months, it's very important that that is communicated and articulated to your teams. When this, first started and people started working remotely, a lot of people, of course, did not feel connected. Personally, at, my organization, while we had half of probably the population working from home, being a hospital, we can't close. So there's still a large number of people coming into work and coming into the office if they don't have that space to work from home. So how do we keep people connected, as well as how do we keep people safe and comfortable, realizing that this is a vulnerable time and some people may be affected personally by it, whether it be themselves or loved ones who are experiencing this disease. So being sure that once you have your plan, leaders are checking in with their employees and still holding them accountable to do exactly what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Again, once you've identified those things that your team will need to continue to work on, be sure that you are checking in with them, whether that be one-on-ones or group meetings throughout the week or every other week. Set a cadence and keep a schedule, providing opportunities for your teams to communicate with you. Additionally, I know a lot of companies, from some of my friends, say that their companies do social happy hours and that sort of thing. That's fun, but keeping in mind, some people, it's a vulnerable time for them, so they may not want to participate. That doesn't mean that they're not a team player, but just being sure that you are checking in with your teams to be sure that they're okay, and making sure that if there are things that they're not able to do at home, or if they don't have the tools to do them, providing some alternatives as well.
Thank you for that. I think that definitely hit on, right, what Jasmine was talking about earlier, in the sense of everyone not might not be able to actually work from home. And I think that's the nature of their jobs, one, but then it's also they might not have the resources that they need to be able to work from home. So Jasmine or Raymond, anything to add there when you're thinking about how do we nail the basics of critical work?
Sure. So I wanted to touch on 3 points. So I wanted to go back to what Bria was talking about in terms of checking in with the team. I think that it is really critical that you individualize how you check in on your team members, just like you do your children. So, parents, and although I'm not a parent, but I have 2 great parents, they cater to my brother and I differently based on our needs. And so how they approached us, their delivery, everything was totally different. I think that in the midst of everything that's going on right now, you really more than any other time really have to customize your attention and your approach and your communication style with your team members. Because I saw that a lot of organizations are using a lot of email. And so it seems like now I feel like I am more overwhelmed with emails, whether they're external emails, because now everyone wants to give me all their latest research on how to handle COVID-19. People are trying to sell me virtual conference passes, or people are trying to communicate with me at my organization. And I'm like, wow, this is like email overload. Like, what is another communication style? So when you're thinking about your people, it's like you don't want to overwhelm them. Think about the different ways that you can communicate with them. So personalizing your check-ins. I would also say make your check-ins as much fun as possible. So now we have a lot of working parents now who are trying to balance having the kids at home as well as trying to go ahead and still work. And for a lot of people, they've actually downsized in terms of, their actual living domains. And so as a result, you have like the office and the kids doing school and everyone in like the same room. And sometimes people really need more than any, like a really nice relief and a break. And so I would say try to make it fun as possible. So I know some organizations are doing like the Netflix party where they're all watching a movie at the same time. I'm a part of the Chicago culture team at Major Lindsay in Africa. So one thing I decided to do was do a virtual coffee hour / happy hour. So I was trying to be inclusive, and I was trying to be inclusive in 2 ways. So when we think about mental health and wellness, we have a lot of people who are in our workforces who might be actually, battling, alcoholism. So it's very important that you don't want to exclude those individuals. So instead of always saying, oh, let's have a happy hour, we're going to like actually have a cocktail. Don't get me wrong, I love my cocktails, but also thinking about, maybe we'll go ahead and have alternative, we'll do coffee. So why we said it was a coffee hour / happy hour, because we did it over 2 time zones. So my organization is global, and I'm responsible for diversity and inclusion for the entire organization. And so we did it with London as well. So it was happy hour in London, and it was coffee time in Chicago. But it gave colleagues an opportunity to really socialize with each other. And we typically don't do international exchanges like that in a social environment. So it kind of like mixes things up. So try to mix things up, I would say, as much as possible. I would say also as leaders, it's important that we stay informed and that we are flexible. So while I am telling a lot of my employees who are experiencing a lot of anxiety, and we're talking about the levels of anxiety, and we're doing meditations with each other and just really helping them to cope, I tell them, hey, you need to like disconnect from the news and everything else. As a leader, I cannot disconnect. Like, I have to stay informed. So 2:30 every day is like, okay, what is Governor Pritzker gonna say? Like, what is Dr. Ngozi going to say to help me to better support, my colleagues? I'm sticking to what the CDC has said. I'm staying, informed. I'm sending colleagues resources, posting, all the CDC things on the intranet, emailing them to people, and helping people to stay informed, but helping to guide how they're staying informed. And another way I did that was through a diversity newsletter that we just sent out last week. And it talked about a lot of the wellness support that we're going to offer them and things of that nature. And then the last thing that I want to say that I think is very, very critical, a lot of organizations have not thought of it, and now we're in crisis, and everyone's like, Establish an emergency response plan. Now, you may have done one, let's say 10 years ago. It needs to be dusted off because half those people are no longer in that organization. But when I was at University of Chicago, I was a part of the emergency response team. And so we had to sit down and we had to think of every different scenario, both at the university as well as the hospital, how we would be impacted by various different threats that we may have, and then who are our critical employees that we need to step up. And if something happens to any of those employees, who is next in line to be able to respond, right? So you're thinking about, we have patients, we have students, we have employees, we have 10,000 people, and then we're global. So then thinking about how we're going to respond to the needs of our people in other countries and being very sensitive to their needs and being very culturally responsible as well. And so if your organization hasn't done it, it doesn't matter the size of your organization. You could be a small business and you have 10 people. Like, you need to think of an emergency response plan. It should be written, it should be thorough, and it should be vetted amongst other people to make sure that you are, having an open mind and that you're not forgetting anything.
Awesome, thank you, Jasmine. I'm switching back, Raymond. I'm not leaving you out of the conversation. I know that we're going to kick to step 2. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of blend your comments related to nailing the business of critical work into what step 2 is. But we wanted to make sure we summarize kind of what we're hearing in themes at each step. So testing your technology, we mentioned that everyone might not have the resources, right, to really work from home. And so it's going to be important to make sure that your IT infrastructure is set up to really support your organization through times like this, which are things that you guys are probably working through, or hopefully 5 or 6 weeks into the response you have. I heard Jasmine really mention an employee resource, an emergency response plan, which I think is really important, but as well as a business continuity plan, right? How are we going to make sure that we can continue to do the work of the organization through times like this? And this is a really great time if you are at a place where your organization is starting to hum a little bit in this remote environment, to look at your BCP and figure out, have we done the things that we've previously said in here? Are there things that we now need to add in since we've gone through kind of this fire drill of COVID-19? And so accountability measures, checking in with your teams, and how you're scheduling phone and video chats. So we're gonna kick it to step 2, and I'm gonna ask Raymond to lead our conversation about making sure that we really are, sorry, there's a poll question here. Let's come back to that poll question. Sorry, Jasmine. Making sure that we are really over communicating with our employees. And I saw during our last conversation that one other question came up, which is, how do we keep our employees on their development track, right? If their hours are reduced, if they've been furloughed, how are we thinking through continuing to support folks so that they're developing in our organization? So Raymond, I'm dumping a hodgepodge of things to you as we talk about step 2 and the importance of communication throughout the organization, but I think you can probably weave that theme through.
Yeah, sounds good. So when it comes to communication, let me first start by saying, even in the best of times, you can never communicate enough. During this crisis, you should be really ramping up your communication efforts, but making sure that they're focused and effective in terms of driving engagement and optimism. And so that what we're not creating is a feeling of disconnectedness, fear, and uncertainty, because that can happen as well. Though the communication efforts may be well intentioned, if not structured well, they can have a counter effect on that. When you talk about virtual working, it further complicates it in terms of how you communicate, especially if your company, doesn't have a plan, as Jasmine talked about, or if they weren't prepared for this. And so some of the things that our company has done to mitigate these factors is, and it may seem basic, but trust me, a lot of organizations don't have a plan until they need one. And then it's too late. And so when you think about the plan, you should be thinking about how you communicate both internally and externally in terms of who your audiences are. You should really be thinking through what are the messages that you want your employees to know, your clients, and also the communities. In our organization, when it comes to learning and development, that drives our business. And so we've created a number of virtual learning offerings for them. And that's a part of the CEO's messaging. He ends every message with a link to the JLL virtual learning site, talking about how important it is for you to go out and learn these things. And I'll give you an example. So how to remain effective working remotely is one of the modules. We must have had 20,000 employees take that course. So people are still engaged, even though they're not at work in the traditional sense. They still want to learn and grow, and that's reinforced through the leader's messaging. We also want to be as transparent as possible. We all know how rumors fly, and people would make up their own story if you don't tell them. And so we want to make sure we're being transparent. We also reinforce the message to our senior leadership: show humility and show your vulnerability as well, especially at the leadership level, because people really want to feel a connection, a special connection to their leaders, and feel like that we're all in it together. The other thing that I think we do really well here at JLL is we use storytelling in a very, very effective way. It's something that really connects. It's a great way for leaders to share their experience and build on those personal connections. In terms of tools, I don't know if there's anything groundbreaking that we do here at JLL. I think we all use similar tools: WebEx, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. And one that I thought was really cool that one of my team members sent to me was a Marco Polo app where you can do like really quick videos to connect. And when I first got it, I don't know, I thought it was some phishing attempt or something, so I was a bit skeptical. But it's something that I think has really connected our team. It's made it really fun it's made the check-ins easier. You just click the button, record a short video, and they have it, and you can get to going back and forth on it. So there are a number of ways to make sure that we stay connected, and we're being very intentional about it, because remote working can lead to isolation, and you don't want people feeling that disconnection from the organization. The other thing we want to do, all of our messages are positive. We believe positivity is contagious. It breeds confidence that we can and we will get through this crisis. And we also reinforce having your teammates back. I mean, when the op tempo is really fast, people are working really hard. Sometimes you get, kind of the siloed effect, and we want to make sure people, stay connected. The other thing that's important is you have to track your progress, communicate, and celebrate the small wins so people can see some of the cost reduction measures that you're putting in place. There's a means to an end, and that we are reaching our goals. The business is healthy and strong, just to reinforce those messages about remaining confident in the company that you're with. We want to make sure we're communicating regularly. So we have a set rhythm when messages go out. So the CEO sends a message out every week to all employees. I do the same in addition to the HR function. Our operating CEOs are in a good rhythm. And what we found is it really sets a good tone in terms of employees know what to expect and when to expect it. Now, they may not like the message all the time. That's not the point. The point is making sure that we're openly communicating with them, and as we should be as leaders. In terms of communication vehicles, the one thing I would express to this group is go beyond the traditional vehicles that we've used, email and company websites and newsletters. I think, especially when you're working virtually, that can be a bit challenging. And so use video more, but also use untapped employee groups to help carry that message too, like employee resource groups. I know we're going to do a session on that another week, but that is a population when things start to slow down. What we've seen in other companies is the focus on employee resource groups tend to be set aside. This isn't a time to set them aside. This is a time to engage them and use them. And so one of the things that we want to do at JLL is use these groups as another communication vehicle to make sure we're touching all levels within the organization.
For that, Raymond, I think those are great tips. We're utilizing some of those kind of same things, right? The CEO is sending regular emails. I'm sending an email weekly, well, not weekly, maybe about bi-weekly, to leaders in the organization to talk through how do they lead inclusively during this time period. And so Tracy, that gets at your question too, around how do we make sure we're still making sure employees are developing and things like that. We're really utilizing our leaders to make sure that they are reaching out to individual members on their team to make sure they have access to the things that they need. We're really focusing on folks who we deem high potential to make sure they continue to stay engaged in the organization and that they have what they need and know that folks are thinking about them and getting good assignments. I'm really encouraging our leaders to eliminate some of those biases that we might use in our decision-making process, right? So instead of just calling up your go-to person and saying, hey, can you do X, Y, and Z for me? Really providing or having an objective process for how you are assigning things, over communicating, so having some more transparency around how decisions are made so folks still feel like they are buying in. I like that idea about tracking your progress too, right? It's important that we can go back to people and say, is this effective? So utilizing pulse surveys or whatever tools you have across your organization to make sure you're getting the intended effect. To people, like you said, folks might not like the message all the time, but it's definitely important that they're receiving it and feel like they're getting information. So Jasmine or Bria, anything to kind of add to what Raymond has laid out as far as over communicating?
I would just kind of echo what Raymond said. We do hold weekly town hall meetings, and they are virtual, so people can either dial in or watch via live stream. And members of our executive team talk about, the status of the hospital, what's going on. We hear from our head of infection control, specifically about the disease, our chief human resources officer. Employees are able to send in questions ahead of time via email, so we always try to get those questions answered during the sessions. We have a COVID-19 intranet site. So there are various ways that employees can get the information that they need. We have a COVID-19 general email set up, so if employees want to ask additional questions, and they are routed to the appropriate person. Again, encouraging leaders to continue to engage their teams, even if they are, working from home. Having that accountability check-in as well, because some people are not 100%, fully doing their role at home because they can't. So what are some of the other things that they can do to keep their time occupied, whether that's working on a special project, whether that is